Can you imagine 6, 8, 10 years zapped out of your life? Gone. Gone to what? Relegated to running from doctor to doctor to doctor, taking drug after drug after drug. This is what I do for a living. It's also what an attorney out in California does for a living. I purchased his book after watching him on a YouTube tape. The book is called Poison. Folks, I couldn't put it down. I mean, here's a guy, a lawyer, who moves into a beautiful new building out in Florida, the creme de la creme. Top floor, looks out at the ocean, at the world, and he now realizes decades later that building started the downfall of his health. Alan Bell is his name. Welcome, Alan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me here, Doug. You're doing really good things,
Thank
bringing
you.
the truth to millions of people.
As do you. I mean, this book, folks, it's layman's terms from somebody who laid there on the ocean because he got the negative ions into his body and it saved him, who turned to a little girl, his daughter, who was hugging him and saying, "Dad, please try this," and it finally pulled him out. In a wheelchair, he's 6'2" at 140 pounds, being wheeled into doctor's offices to hear over and over and over, "Nice meeting you, we just don't know." Alan, how did this all start? How did your illness start? And how severe was it?
Well, take yourself back to the 1980s, Doug. I was an organized crime prosecutor in South Florida, prosecuting Colombian cartel drug rings and the mafia. I was living the American dream, going on vacations, an athlete, things couldn't be better. I moved into a new office building, and suddenly my life had changed. I started off getting the sniffles. It turned into what I thought was a flu. It morphed into something far more sinister, where I started getting grand mal seizures. We went all over the country trying to find out what was going on. Was it a virus? Was it a bacteria? What was this that was basically killing me, causing me to become severely ill? I was 185 pounds. I was an athlete. I went down to 140 pounds, as you said, in a wheelchair, until finally we went into a doctor's office who sat me down and told me that I had been poisoned through the blood tests. Well, I asked him, "Doc, how did I get poisoned?" And he asked me, "Do you know anybody who would want to poison you?" Well, I just sort of sat back in my chair and chuckled and said, "Doc, I'm an organized crime prosecutor. There's mafiosos from the Colombian cartel drug rings, and they would love to get a hold of me." So we went back down to find out who had poisoned me. And we went through all aspects of my life. We went to the movie theaters that I went in, the gymnasiums that I worked out in, the restaurants that I ate in, the courthouse that I worked in. And finally, we went to the office building that I worked in. And what they found is that there were other co-workers in that building that got ill as well. My first reaction was, my gosh, why would they want to poison them too? Well, as it turns out, Doug, it wasn't a person that had poisoned us, but it was the building that had poisoned us, that we were working in. And it caused a whole array of all kinds of chronic diseases in all of us, in different variations. And by that time, I had become hypersensitive to everything in the environment. I was allergic to everything. Perfumes, colognes, hairsprays, automobile exhaust, whatever I came in contact with, I went into grand mal seizures.
Wow.
So in order to save my life, they airlifted me into a specially built bubble into the middle of the Arizona desert, made out of glass, brick, and steel. That's it. And outside this bubble, all it was cactus. No roads, no schools, no workplaces, no churches, no people, nothing. It was isolated and desolate. And that's where I ended up with my little girl, Ashley, in the middle of the Arizona desert.
Wow. At what point, you know, Alan, I've got a clinical nutrition background and probably saw over 1,000 of these doctors' patients who had symptoms of unknown etiology. And I'm sure you've heard that 100 times. Alan, we don't know. Nice guy, good to see you. That'd be $180 plus a lab test. See you later. And many of these doctors said to me, Doug, I'll prescribe antifungals off label, right? And these antifungals, look, worm medicine like ivermectin, mebendazole, they kill fungus also. And so I don't know if these people had, a lot of worms in their intestine, intestinal flukes, or horrible yeast and fungal problems. But then we'd impose a diet that I developed after I came home from Vietnam in the 70s. The diet was developed exclusively to starve fungus. Fungi, once on board, must eat. They crave, and they thrive on carbohydrates, sugars. Ironically, cancer cells need sugar to live. So do fungal cells, but I digress. You had to find your way out of that wheelchair and back into a normal life. When did that occur? Was it soon after Ashley said, Dad, please take one of these pills? You were worried about the effects of that pill.
Right, that's a good question, Doug. We ended up living in that bubble for 8 years with no hope, no way out. And Ashley had spoken to a scientist who thought that this anti-seizure drug would help. But to take that drug was a two-edged sword. I had to really think about this. Taking a medication like that was somewhat experimental, new on the market, would this be a drug that kills me, where Ashley would end up an orphan? Or would this drug be a magic bullet that got me out of the bubble? And we had to really think about this. And my dad said, "You're not a dad like this.
Yeah.
Take it." So I took it, and it worked.
You said in the book, I woke up the next morning, but at least I woke up. You were worried about dying that night on that pill because there are some to this particular medicine. There's some nasty side effects, and you've
That's
now
right.
been on it for quite a while, and it's helping.
I've been on it for over 30 years now. The dose, I drastically reduced the dose. I was on 4,800 milligrams of gabapentin a
Wow,
day.
wow,
If you ask any
wow.
doctor who knows about gabapentin, they'll say that's enough to kill a horse.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and I was on it for decades, and I've weaned myself down now to 1,200 milligrams a day, which is more reasonable.
As a guy who now prosecutes apartment building owners and so forth who knowingly let people live in a mold environment, teach me a little bit about when you were getting better and began to realize that there's another chemical out there that is injuring a lot of people. It's called mold, which makes poisons called mycotoxins. Tell me about that.
Right. The law firm that Aaron Brockovich was working in started referring me many of these new cases, mold cases. And this was back in the 90s when very few lawyers knew anything about mold. Uh, Very, very few, including the lawyers that Aaron Brockovich worked for. They didn't know what it was.
Right.
So they started sending these mold cases to me, and I basically learned it from the ground up. And the more I read about the mold, the more victims I spoke to about the mold, the more concerned that I got that this is an insidious pathogen that could not only cause serious permanent injury, but it could also kill you. And I've had clients that died from mold exposure. And the thing is that we have to prove this in the courtroom through scientific evidence that the mold exposure caused illness or death in people. And we do that through high-tech science. We do it through neuroquants, which measures brain abnormalities. It could show portions of the brain that are inflamed, other portions of the brain that are atrophied, and they have a signature fingerprint that's consistent with mold exposure. So we go into courtrooms with basically imaging of the brain, and we put it up on the blackboard, and we actually show the jury what the brain injury is and how it was caused by mold. You know, mold could also cause immunological injury. In many of these instances, these victims have what's called mast cell activation syndrome, where the mast cells in the immune system give off inflammatory substances, or otherwise known as inflammation, that inflames your entire body. That can kill you as well. There's mast cells in your whole body. There's mast cells in your digestive tract. There's mast cells in your lungs. There's mast cells in your sinuses. There's mast cells that float all around in your blood in your entire body. And we can measure these mast cells, and we can actually show and prove this in a courtroom, that these mold sufferers not only in some instances suffer from immunological injury, mast cell activation syndrome, but also suffer from neurological injury, in other words, brain injury that I've just described. So the science now has caught up to what's going on to the point where we could actually prove this inside a courtroom.
Wow, I'll land this way, Alan. In 1999, the Mayo Clinic wrote a paper, and I didn't have a cell phone back then, but my fax machine kept dinging all day, and the assistant would come in and say, "Man, you're getting a lot of faxes." I had spoken at ear, nose, and throat meetings about my hypotheses that many sinus problems were linked to fungus, and yet 100% of chronic sinusitis patients go on fungus foods. We call those antibiotics. And so we were taking a fresh sinus infection, acute flare-up, and making it chronic, by keeping them on antibiotics. 1999, Mayo Clinic, 96% of what they cultured from a whole bunch of people's sinuses was fungus. Dr. Sherris, one of the authors of that, went on to say in that publication, I thought 5%, maybe 7%, we'd find fungus. They all had fungus. How many people do you feel, Alan, after all your studies, the court time and so forth, and all those you've helped, thank you, how many people you think are suffering from chemical hypersensitivity, from mold invasion, et cetera, and are running to their doctors? And as you know, mycology is not a course. Chemical sensitivity is not a course in medical training. How many of the population do you feel in your heart have chemical problems?
That's a very good question, Doug. And the answer is, I'll give you an answer. It's not what I feel. It's what the U.S. government says. The U.S. government has concluded in certain studies that approximately 15% of the American population suffers from multiple chemical sensitivity. And what they've done is, in the American Disabilities Act, which is federal law, they officially recognize multiple chemical sensitivity as a disability that requires special accommodations by employers or landlords in public places. So it's a widespread problem. I would tell you that, in my opinion, it's a much higher percentage than 15%.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot higher than that.
But still, 15% is 5 million, Alan. It's a huge number of people. I mean, look, folks, I'm sorry, go ahead, Alan.
Yeah. What do we have? 350 million Americans?
Right.
So that's
just about 5 million.
Over 50 million.
Or 50 million. 10 would be 30. You're right. 50 million, not 5 million.
Right.
Correction. Wow. The book is called Poisoned. Alan Bell has been my special guest, my new best friend. A very humbling work of art. I got it on Amazon, I don't know, $22 or something. Folks, you see all the dog-eared pages. Amazing book. Thank you for writing it. Thank you for putting it in English that everyone can understand. You were way down, almost dead, and little girl, dare I say, the hand of God, picked you up and got you to where you are today. Congratulations.
Amen. And Doug, thank you for bringing the truth to millions of people.
Together we're strong, Alan. Thank you.
Yeah.